All right. Today, on For the Love of Sports, I have Peter Huryk, author, speaker, coach. He's a soccer coach at Virginia Episcopal School, and he's also a Spanish teacher. So thank you for being a teacher, especially with everything that's going on now. I think all teachers are starting to get the not quite the appreciation they deserve, but a little bit more. But Peter, thank you so much for hanging out with me today.
Not a problem. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. So Peter, the first question I have for everybody on For the Love of Sports is, why do you love sports so much?
Basically, I mean, for me, I started out playing at a very young age, about 6 or 7. Soccer was my main sport. And for the true answer of right now, why I love sports so much is because of the fact that sports are a great metaphor for life. I think that's why we love sports as much as we do, because of the fact that within in the example of soccer, 90 minutes or, basketball or whatever your time limit is, you have all of the range of emotions that you have throughout the life of a person happen in that small period of time. And, since we're no longer in a life and death struggle for survival, it's probably the best metaphor for what it is to be alive, to, succeed, fail, and test yourself to your limits as much as you possibly can without
It,
worrying about whether you're going to survive or not.
It's so true, man. I mean, the range of emotions a person will go through either playing the game, coaching the game, or just as a fan watching the game. If I watch a Mets game, I go from completely elated to depressed in probably 2 pitches, just because that's what the Mets do to me. And it's one of those things where, and then there's feelings that I've never felt before, and I don't know if I ever will again, or at least in that context, where I was at the 2015 World Series at the Mets in Citi Field, the one that the Mets lost. They lost 4-1 in the series, but I was at the game that they won. And I've never felt that feeling before in the stadium. It's completely packed, standing room only tickets. People are sneaking in, all that stuff. And there's that energy, and it's a feeling that, I don't know. I've never felt it. I don't know what it is. And it's just incredible.
Yeah, I had the same type of experience this past April in 2019. My son and I went to England, and we went to 2 soccer games while we were over there. We went and saw Everton play against Manchester United, which I, was doing for my son because he's an Everton fan. But then the other game that we went to Peterborough United versus Sunderland, and I'm a Peterborough United fan, and we were down 1-0 late in the game, and one of our players put a goal in, and I almost passed out, like, from the excitement. And I've never had that feeling before. I don't know that I ever will again. The only thing that saved me was I recognized about halfway, I'm like, oh, I'm going to pass out here. And my at the time 13-year-old son would have been having to deal with that situation in the middle of England without any parental help or anything. So I was like, I'm gonna calm down a little bit.
Oh my goodness. But yeah, there's nothing like it. It's always interesting to meet people that watch reality TV shows. Just put on a playoff hockey game, man. See what that's like. You were on the edge of your seat from, the second period on every second and third period, especially in a close game in any sport. It's just incredible. So I never understood why reality TV needs to exist if we have sports practically every day, but you're completely right. It is an absolute metaphor for life.
My thing about reality TV is, in general, I call it the Honey Boo Boo effect. I think it's the reverse of the Bannister effect. I obviously, Roger Bannister, the first 4-minute mile, once he does that, he breaks the glass ceiling for what's possible within 6 weeks, however many other people do it and everything like that. And what Bannister did was he showed us what was possible. And then the opposite happens. I call it the Honey Boo Boo effect, which is people, in order to make themselves feel good, want to see somebody who's lower on the totem pole than they are. And so therefore, that's where reality TV comes in, I think, a lot of the time is, people don't want to see people that are better than them. They want to see somebody worse, so they can feel a little bit of that self-esteem type of thing. It's an interesting caveat there.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess I wasn't even looking at it from that perspective. I was just looking at it from the perspective, as you said, of life, right? Like, we're watching reality TV because it's real. And for anyone out there listening, I'm using very heavy air quotes. And we all know it's not real. We all know it's scripted in some way, shape, or form. I was woken up on the beach one time by a reality TV producer telling the reality TV stars what they were supposed to say in the next shot. So we all kind of know it's fake. But it's just always interesting to me, again, just kind of going back to that metaphor of life is how that connects. And I guess, for you personally, when did you make that, I guess for lack of a better term, connection with understanding sports and life and the correlations and the comparisons between the two of them?
I think I really got deep into that thought process probably about 8 to 10 years ago. I think I always had an inkling that it existed,
Hmm.
but for the most part, that's been the time where I started to really get into it. Obviously, you and I have some mutual connections, and I was coaching a lot of high school boys mainly in soccer. And this one particular summer, I had a team that I was working with, and every single practice, it seemed like, even though we were working with soccer skills and everything like that, something would come up where it was, hey, this is a relevant
Hmm.
thing that's going to keep on peaking up in your lives. So just keep an eye out for that. And what I was doing is, because it was a summer team and not everybody was making it to every practice, I was sending out an email as kind of a recap for, what was going on that particular practice and what we talked about, not just the soccer skills, but also the life skills. And about, a month into the season, I was like, I have a lot more to say here. And
Hmm.
also, there are bigger concepts that I could be dealing with. So I just kept on writing, and that's what turned into my first book. Actually, I didn't write that first book to publish it, to put it out there as like some grandiose idea of mine out into the world. It was specifically written for the guys on that team as kind of like a collection
Hmm.
of, this is what we talked about throughout the season, and a little bit more. And but when I was writing it, my wife was like, well, why not just publish it? And you never know
Hmm.
what you're going to have happen. So I put that book out there, and it did relatively well for not having any expectations
Hmm.
whatsoever. It did all right.
Hey, zero expectations. You get a one. I mean, that's
Mhm.
better than nothing. And don't worry, the both your books, if I'm not mistaken, you have two, will both be in the show notes for people to check out
Mhm.
later if they want to go grab those. Because again, I'm assuming, I have a feeling that through this conversation, people are going to understand a little bit more around why you wrote those books and how you were capable of contributing to many people's lives along the way, which I think is really, really important. And so you've played soccer. I know you played a little in, obviously high school. I'm assuming some travel. You also played in college. What is it about soccer? And if I'm not mistaken, called the most beautiful game. What is it about soccer that connects so well with you to the point where you're at a game down 1-0, you're about to pass out when your team scores?
Um, well, I mean, that particular instance is a culmination of a lot of emotions of being there with my son and everything like that. But in general, I think the reason why soccer is such a beloved sport all around the world is because of the fact that it is probably, in my opinion, the greatest metaphor for life. And the reason why a sport like football, all right, why football has taken off in this country over the past century, and maintained itself as our number one sport, is because of the fact that football, the American game, has a lot of things that overlap with the American psyche. Okay, it's very American to think, okay, if I'm moving forward, I'm being successful. If I'm moving backward, I'm not being successful. And that whole entire idea of manifest destiny, if you want to go back historically and everything like that, thinking about that idea of progress is very American. So that's why that sport caught on in the American psyche.
Hmm.
Plus the idea of exceptionalism, where it's, the quarterback is one of the most important role players. And, you have these people who are specific roles that, if it's not for them, the team doesn't do well,
Hmm.
as opposed to soccer, where it's a little bit more of everybody's important. One of the things that I have a tendency to talk about with my football players, students who are like, well, I just don't understand soccer. Well, soccer in football are actually the same exact sport. If you know anything about football, you know a bunch about soccer already, because there's the same number of players. It's actually, if you look at it genealogically, soccer is the grandfather of football, because of the fact that rugby's in the middle,
Hmm.
and American football is down there. But the whole entire reason why soccer so beloved around the world is because it deals with life the way that life actually works. Is it always in your best interest to go forward? No, actually, it's not always best in your best interest to go forward at all costs. Sometimes you've got to step back, reflect, go back in order to create space in order for you to move forward, to get towards your goals. I won't, I can't actually show you right now because I don't have a drawing on me. But the thing I've been working on most recently is the soccer field. If you were to diagram out a soccer field and the boundaries, I've been looking at the boundaries a lot recently. And one of the things that I started thinking about is, well, how often do you use the different boundaries within a soccer field? Like, the center circle. How often do you use it? Well, you're guaranteed to use it at least twice per game. Well, what does that correlate to in your life? And the boundaries on the outside, what does that correlate to? And I started thinking about things like, hydration, things like, your diet, breathing exercise, and stuff like that, and the defensive third versus the offensive third, and what it's like to have somebody score against you in a game versus in real life. How does somebody scoring against you? What does that correlate to in the real world? And ultimately, I'm finding more and more that this relationship between soccer and life is way bigger than I ever thought it was. And I think that that's why the sport is so, universally beloved, is because of the fact that in the game, there is so much about what it's like to be alive. The unrealistic situation of, there's very few professions in this world where being 300 pounds and 6'7" is really helpful and being full of muscle. But, soccer, it has a tendency to lend itself more towards general fitness and all of these other things. So, that's where I see a lot of the correlations and, the overlaps and why I think soccer is what it is.
And I think that's really interesting. I mean, the general fitness aspect of it, I totally agree with you. Like the NBA, the NFL, it's just ridiculous. Like these guys are 1 in a million, essentially. They are super hyper specific. But as you said, with soccer, it's just like, all right, I mean, obviously, probably better to be a little taller or a little stronger or a little faster, but you don't have to be superhuman at all of these things to be the best. I mean, look at Messi. He's not the tallest guy in the world, right? I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo, I think, is the most attractive man on planet Earth, voted by everyone else on the internet. But it's just one of those things where you don't have to be just this unbelievable, just specimen of a human being in soccer. I think that makes sense. That makes sense to me. But kind of thinking about it the way you were, the one of the first analogies you made, which I love, it's good to go back. That way you can create space, you can reflect, you can understand, kick it back. Like let's calm down. Let's take a second. Let's see what we have and let's try and regroup and move forward. And as you said, with football, if you're not moving forward, you're either staying in the same place, which is bad, or you're moving backwards, which is worse, right? And then you lose it down, right? Because of how the system works. And how do these ideas come to you? Like, what are you sitting down and just kind of like, hey, I'm going to reflect for an hour. Hey, I'm just going to think for an hour. Or is this do these just kind of, as you're on the field, as you're just talking, some of these things just kind of pop up in your head and then you start to dive deeper? Because these are some really interesting concepts that I don't think everybody just naturally makes. I believe you and understand, like some of it might be in the subconscious, but saying it out loud to people, I think actually makes even more of it reinforced.
Yeah. A lot of it stems from the fact that it's an overlap or a synthesis of the things that I read, the things that I listen to, the intake that I have. I have a tendency to study a lot of psychology, a little bit of neuroscience, a little bit of leadership, and all of those things. When you start seeing ideas, you see the patterns that are underlying here. Obviously, you've got taking a different route. You got the science fiction world of Star Wars and everything like that, and the hero of 1,000 faces. We aren't telling any new stories. It's all of them have this underlying current that there's not a whole lot new under the sun. It's just how these things overlap and how they coalesce in order to, make us live a better life at this moment that we are living in. The story of Ulysses or whoever is the same story as Luke Skywalker, is the same story as Messi. It's the same story as anybody. And, just seeing that. And for me, I've been very fortunate that, I've had a science class or an experiment going on at a daily basis with the players that I deal with and everything like that. And our common friend Jeremy is a perfect example. All right, now I don't know if I'm going to out anything that he didn't already know, but he was a junior going into his senior year, and we were thinking about cutting him because he had played on JV the year before, and he really hadn't impressed. His left foot wasn't very good, and so we were thinking about cutting him. And at the beginning of the season, we did all of these tests. We did the 2-mile test. We did what we would call the Man U test, and the Man U test was a 100-yard sprint followed by a 100-yard jog back, and the requirement was 20. You had to do 20 in order to be able to start for varsity. Well, Jeremy runs the first, second, makes it to 20. He ran 32, which is more than anybody had ever read. Most guys gave up as soon as they got to the 20 because that's all they needed to do. They did the bare minimum. And when he did the 32, we're like, we can't cut this kid. And then he ended up like he had the assist for the game-winning goal to win us a county championship, and then got us into the state final with an assist. And it's like, you look at all of these things happening over and over again, and it's like, I would be stupid not to see all of these life lessons about what's going on in the bigger picture of thing when I on a daily basis get to deal with young people who are living this stuff out.
That is very impressive. And so I personally did not know that story. I hope Jeremy knows that story because I'm going to ask him about it if he doesn't already.
The thing that he does know is he knows he made the team. I don't know if he knows that we were thinking about cutting him, although I think the writing might have been on the wall because he did play JV as a junior.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it's always a pretty large tell. And no, Jeremy's a very, very good friend of mine. He's going to be in my wedding, in a couple months if all goes well,
great kid.
Yeah, he's incredible. I love him a lot. He's a very good friend of mine, but it's just, it's a really good point. As you said, most people gave up at 20 and he specifically continued well past it. I mean, 25 probably would have been a good look too, but no, I mean, 32, 50+% above 60%, whatever that number is, quick math. Obviously it shows tenacity, it shows something. And as you said, just that connection to life is very important. The people that are willing to go the extra mile and the extra literal mile after that, I think those are the kind of people you at least want to surround yourself with. And you and the coaching staff made, it seems like, the correct decision because it allowed him then to be in the right place at the right time in multiple situations to push you guys even further, which I think is great. And a year makes a difference. People change. People could do better. And again, just going back to that connection at life. And no, Hunterdon Central, I know you coached there for a little while. It was literally a couple miles down the school. I went to North Hunterdon, so I know some years we beat you guys. Most of the years you guys beat us. But it was still nice and it was good. And some other good friends of ours. If Mike's out there listening, I hope he's enjoying this conversation, and I hope he's texting Jeremy right now, maybe poking a little bit of fun because that's just the kind of guy he is. But while you're at Hunterdon Central, I know you were telling me before we hopped on, you also created a soccer documentary while you were there. So, I mean, I'm not like the biggest documentary buff, but we have to talk about it. As I said before, everybody except you apparently are watching The Last Dance right now on planet Earth because no sports are going on. But okay, I'll let you. Okay, tell me.
No, I watched the first episode.
Okay,
but I watched it with my wife, and we both, got the chance to watch it. And now we're going to watch the rest of them. We're just watching them together. We're just not watching them live when they're coming on Sunday night.
I get that.
We've got the ESPN app, so we can, watch it when we have the chance.
Yeah, Forgiven. I'll give you that now. But
I grew up during the time where, I'm actually a Larry Bird fan, but when Michael was coming into his own, that was the prime time when I was actually watching the NBA. Mm-hmm. So it's totally relevant to me. It's fun to watch my childhood come up on the TV screen.
Right. It's very interesting. And I mean, I remember my parents sat me down in 1998. If I'm not mistaken, against the Utah Jazz in that last one. And I was 7, I was 6 at the time. They're like, hey, you have to watch this. I was like, okay, Michael Jordan's on. They're like, no, just sit down, watch this last game. They end up winning. They win the finals, whatever. I don't care, but I have those memories still. And it's much more important now kind of seeing everything that's going on. It's really cool. And that's kind of why I love documentaries. It allows us to look back on something. And, we all remember what happened, but we don't know all the details. So it's really interesting to see that. And so with the documentary that you created, what was, I guess, what was the reason why you wanted to do something like that? And I guess, what came out of it for you personally, but then for the audience and anybody paying attention?
The documentary was an idea that I had when I was driving into work each and every day. I would listen to sports talk radio, ESPN radio, coming out of Philly, and listening to guys like Mike Missinelli and a few of the other talk radio guys, and they're talking NFL, they're talking NBA, they're talking MLB, but they're not really talking about soccer ever. So I started thinking to myself,
And I
well,
apologize, I don't mean to
yeah.
cut you off. When did they get their MLS team?
And that's one of the other
Oh,
reasons is
okay.
because
Sorry.
of the fact no, that's fine, is the Philly team was brand new when I actually started making the
Okay.
documentary. It was, I believe they came into the league in 2010. So my documentary I made in 2011. So all of that stuff, just interested me. I'm not hearing about soccer on the radio. So, where does soccer stand was my, because I had been a soccer guy my entire life. And, so I wanted to figure that out. So I decided to interview 3 groups of people. I started off with the sports talk radio hosts. I interviewed 4 of them. And just asked them questions about what they thought about soccer, and then also I quizzed them a little bit on their soccer knowledge, and that was like a fun little exercise. In general, the opinion was soccer's nothing; it's never going to amount to anything, and it is what it is. The second group was international players who were over here in the United States playing soccer professionally. So Joel Limper, who played for the New York Red Bulls, Farid Mondragon, who played for Philadelphia Union at the time, and then 2 other guys who played for lower league teams. And elsewhere, what's it like here? What is the actual true level? And got some good feedback on, hey, the play is actually not that bad. Uh-oh, we just blanked out there for a second. So
We're back. I think we're
okay.
good, right?
Yep.
All right,
I
cool,
don't know
cool.
if that was on my side or your side, but anyway.
Chalk it up to being on my side.
Okay.
But yeah, if you could just start over with, you just said those 2 players' names and pretty much just roll right into it from there.
Okay. So Farid Mondragon and Joel Impair, and then the other 2, Paul Shaw was the other one, and I don't even remember the 4th guy, so I don't remember his name off the top of my head. But anyway, I interviewed those guys to get the input on what soccer is like compared to other places. They've played elsewhere. They came over here. What do you think of the game over here? And the general consensus by them was the level's pretty good, and some of the crowds are really nice. And then the last guy that I interviewed was Dan Cordemonch, who is the executive vice president of MLS. And, so what's your opinion about where soccer is and where is it going and everything like that? And again, he's an insider for MLS. And so he has his own opinions about where soccer is. And the thing that I got more than anything out of that experience was that the person whose opinion mattered most was actually me, because I'm a father of a young son and daughter who, my son knows who Thierry Henry is, at the time was a big player and everything like that. I was taking my son to games, and I was what I started referring to as a first generation soccer. My dad didn't play soccer, but I did. And so then the second generation is my son. And that's why, things like the NFL and the MLB are such a big deal, is because I've got, my brother-in-law is a huge Yankees fan. He's a Yankees fan. You know why? Because his father was a Yankees fan. And why are his kids Yankees fans? Because their dad was a Yankees fan. And so that whole entire thing of that generational tidal wave, if you will eventually take over in the US, but it's just going to take time. People think that, all of a sudden soccer is going to become, the huge sport that it is every place else. It takes generations for that to happen. I graduated from high school in 1994. That was the year that the World Cup was here, and we didn't even have a true, we have the USL, which existed, and I'll, talk about that more later if you want to, but the MLS didn't exist until 1996. So, true level of, highest level professional soccer really wasn't around. And now we've got a league in MLS that, has 20, I think they're up to 24 teams, and it's only getting larger. So, and the number of lower league teams keeps on increasing. So.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, as you said, it's the generational effect. Baseball has been around since 18, blah blah blah, or whatever, and that's it's very impressive. I'm a Mets fan because my mom's a Mets fan because her mom's a Mets fan. That's just kind of how it worked, and so I fell in love with the game, and I continue to watch. And you make a really good point. Was that something that you, for lack of a better term, figured out during the filming process, or the editing process, or was that something that you kind of knew and you just wanted to see if other people had and saw that same narrative?
It wasn't a foregone conclusion before the ending of the process. Like, I went in looking for answers that, possibly by interviewing all these different people, that I was going to get some kind of perspective that they had that I was going to receive. But more than anything, I remember, filming the last piece of the documentary was me kind of summing up, and that's exactly what I got to. And I kind of got to it at that moment of, maybe I am the most important person in this equation. Now, obviously not me as the only soccer fan in the US, but it's an individual decision. I actually wrote a blog post about 2 years ago now. It was when the World Cup was going on, and I wrote the blog post saying that if the U.S. doesn't win the World Cup by 2026, it's my fault. Now, is it really my fault? No, truly, it's not 100% my fault. But everybody who is a soccer fan who wants the game to take off in this country needs to do their part in order to make that happen. And if we are all doing our part to make that happen, it's much more likely to happen. The only reason why we're not a soccer nation is because not enough people want for that to happen on the grand scale. It's going to happen. It's just going back to the football metaphor of manifest destiny, it even works for, things like that, where when the U.S. puts it to its mind that it wants to be the best at anything, it eventually figures it out. So
very true. Yeah, I mean, if we just took our best athletes from all the sports that we already had and put them in soccer, I think we'd put up a pretty darn good squad.
Yeah.
And I think we could do some damage there. We just think about it. LeBron, I think he could fit somewhere on a soccer field, right? I don't know exactly where he would be able to fit.
He would have a totally different body composition.
Absolutely.
if he was training his entire life in order to be a soccer player, and that's just the way that it would be.
I do think his athleticism could be utilized in some way, shape, or form, but it would be interesting. I would definitely love to see that. And so, so we spoke about you writing books. You have another one as well. So we spoke about the first. You have a second one coming out. You created a documentary. I said before, you're a speaker. You write blog posts. Where did this content creation side of you come out? And I guess, like, when did you start to tap into that and realize it was something not only could you utilize, but you actually had a lot of fun doing?
It all springs back to that original book, which actually the first two books are out. I'm working on a third, actually.
Oh, I apologize.
No, that's all right. Quite all right. So the first book came out, and after I got done writing it, and it was this, real thing that I had up online, I decided I was going to keep saying things. I was actually at the National Soccer Coaches Convention in Philadelphia that winter, and I ran to the Rocky Steps, as I always do whenever I'm in Philadelphia. No matter how far away my hotel is, I always run to the Rocky Steps. That's just a childhood thing for me. I watched Rocky so many times, so I always would run to the Rocky Steps, and I was like, oh, I could write something about that. And I just on that trip, I actually signed up for a WordPress account and made my blog, and I've been writing on my blog ever since. So it's I guess a little bit of the teacher in me, in the idea that there's no point in me having knowledge and not sharing it. because, if you break me down to my core as a person, who am I? I'm here on this planet to help people. And, there's all kinds of different ways to help. And, if somebody stumbles onto my blog or stumbles onto one of my books, that's great. The benefit for me is not always seeing the results. It's just that the results happen.
Exactly. And I 100% agree. We're all here to help somebody in some way, shape, or form. Hopefully you can do that in more ways than one. And I think, again, being a coach, being a teacher, being a leader of young men specifically, I think is very important. And I know you also coached, semi-pro a little bit. So that's like a whole nother area. I know you coached a little bit in college as well. What is it like at these different levels, dealing with, 17 and 18-year-olds versus dealing with 21, 22-year-olds versus just out of college, making a small amount of money. It's called semi-pro for a reason. How have you been able to connect with different young men along the way in a way that makes sense to them?
The thing about coaching at the different levels is, what are the needs of that particular person? When you get into the lower levels of, youth and everything like that, at that point, your major job is to try to match and or exceed their excitement level for what's going on. Because, I've chosen to make coaching one of my professions. I want them to see what it is that I love about this game, and that's what I've got to put onto display. As you move into the high school ranks, for the most part, that is, obviously when I'm getting beyond the techniques, like, giving them the techniques to be able to be successful, but also high school boys in in particular are relatively easy creatures to figure out. It's, give them an emotionally charged message that will point them in a direction and let them go. And that's a pretty easy thing to do with a high school person, because of the fact that at that age, they're still developing, their prefrontal cortex and stuff like that. Your brain doesn't finish developing until you're 25. And, so there's a lot of these emotional triggers that you can play on a high school age kid to get them to get more out of themselves than they know is in there. And that's one of the things that, it's kind of pervasive throughout all ages, but to a certain extent, people have no idea what they're capable of. So if you can put them in a direction and rev them up to the point where they believe that they can do whatever it is that you have told them that they can do, and then you show them that next level, that's where you can see real results. And then at the upper levels in the college and, the little bit of semi-pro that I've dealt with, it's less and less about, skill development, tactics, and everything like that. That's more about just making sure that the blade is sharp. When I was coaching my last stint in the male game at the college level, we went undefeated for an entire season until the last game. And the thing was, my job was basically, the head coach was a really good tactician. The assistant coach was really good at running practices. My job was emotional management. I was the guy who, at the beginning of the pregame talk, we would have, here are the tactics, here's this. And that was my small piece. It was, you've got I always break it down into the three parts of any game. As if you're going to win a soccer game or a basketball game, I don't think it works as much for baseball because it's just a different sport, but you got the mental, the physical, and the emotional, and you've got to win 2 out of the 3 games in order to win the game overall. And if you've got your tactics right and you've got your, physical training right, you've got a better chance. But that emotional component is often the wild card that people have a tendency not to A, understand, and B, have control over. Because, it's one thing to have a gas pedal in a car and be able to rev it up to 100 miles per hour. But if you don't have a steering wheel to go along with that gas pedal, you're going to end up in a real bad spot.
Hmm.
So ultimately, my job was, getting them directed into a particular way, and also teaching them how to manage that. You know, you can't keep control of yourself. Then you're going to run into all kinds of problems. So,
Absolutely.
that was more of my role in the college and the semi-pro type of thing. It was looking at that aspect of the game.
That's really interesting. Especially considering, as you said, I think that's a great analogy. Those three different sides of the game, and I think it works in baseball. I think it works in football. It's just maybe those scales might not be even, right? In baseball, it's probably a little bit more mental. In football, maybe it's a little bit more physical in certain aspects. Maybe that's basketball. I don't know, but I think in all three, all sports I can think of off the top of my head, at least, it seems like those three things all play a major part in some way, shape, or form, which I think is really interesting. And so, you were talking about the mental and the emotional aspects, and I know, when we spoke last week, if I'm not mistaken, you were telling me that the speaker side of you came from those emotional halftime speeches, and giving them and getting people to understand what they need to do, and getting them revved up, but hopefully giving them enough kind of constraints or bumpers, let's call it, so that they stay in their lane. How did you then transition those halftime speeches to the classroom, and then transition both of those to becoming a speaker to allow just more people to hear your message, take it in, and understand what they need to do in their life?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is having been a sports person and also been a teacher for many years now, you know, the halftime speeches are an easy place to show that amount of emotion, because it's the absolute right spot to do it. When you go into the classroom and you try and give that same exact rousing speech of, you guys can go out there and do that. If you think of the general high school
Hmm.
classroom, it really doesn't fit. So
Right.
every once in a while, I would be able to sneak in these types of messages without going to the umpteenth degree of emotion. It was more of like, my one class in Belvedere High used to refer to me as the motivational ninja. It was, I would be talking about something, and then all of a sudden it was like this, you know, circuitous route of coming around and saying something that was motivational
Hmm.
without it, like, them realizing that I was getting there. So then once I had done enough of that, where I was able to sneak in the message in that classroom environment, I started to look at it and, like, well, I really like this idea. I really like the concept of sneaking in positive messages to kids who need to hear them in a environment where they weren't really expecting to hear something. And so I started doing a little bit of, the idea of, all right, well, going out and speaking to kids in,
Hmm.
assemblies and things like that was something that, I thought, well, I've got the emotional side, so I can get a crowd up, and then I've also got the content side. I can come up with the ideas that need to be put out there. And I was like, all right, well, I think I can make this work. And so I've done a couple dozen presentations at
Hmm.
this point. It's something that I enjoy doing. I like, I know that a lot of people view public speaking as, like, worse than death and everything, but I actually enjoy it. I like that concept of getting up in front of other people and having them, listen to what it is that I have to say. Because the one thing that I have over those kids is, usually someplace around 30 years more experience. And I would have loved and, really enjoyed the idea of somebody coming to me and saying, hey, here are these 15 potholes that you're going to
Hmm.
run into at some point. Try and avoid them as best as you possibly can. Now, some of those potholes you just have to go into for yourself. I mean, you have to learn how to deal with a broken heart yourself, because that's just part of growing up. But, some of the things you don't need to go into that pothole because I already went there. It's not a good place. And you can really avoid it by doing this, this, and this.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that. I mean, that is a very important piece of what I try and learn too. And I've heard, a good friend of mine, David Meltzer, calls it the dummy tax. If you've seen someone do something and they've screwed up at it and now they know what to do, you don't have to pay that tax. You could just ask them what not to do. And you just then, as you said, try and avoid it as much as possible. Obviously, things like broken hearts will come up for just about everybody on planet Earth, but it's just one of those things where if you can avoid some of these, I don't want to say rudimentary, but natural occurrences, you can avoid them. Just kind of helps project you even further and you don't have to deal with it. To the public speaking point, I hated public speaking and then I started to do it more and now I love it. That's why I go live all the time now and I'm in front of people constantly and it's a blast, and that's why I also, as you were saying, that's why I love having the show. I don't get to share that much wisdom because I don't know that much. I get to have people like you on who have all that wisdom. And then hopefully they can say, hey, Mike, great job on that interview with Pete. Hey, he had some great points to make. And hopefully a little bit of that love gets showered on me at some point. But I love it. And also the last point, I cannot really blame too many high school students, like 7:45 in the morning, a rousing speech coming from Professor Huryk. Sorry, man, I probably wouldn't have gotten up for that too much either. I can't really blame them all that much.
You cannot blame them. Probably it was one of the coolest things ever. I had these twin boys, Pat and Logan Farley, just because of the fact that my schedule changed over the years. I started out teaching in middle school in Belvedere, and then I progressively moved upward. I taught both of them for about 6 years.
Wow.
And it was hilarious because Logan was a huge actor and Pat got into acting a little bit more. And they one day got up in front of class and did like not a roast, but kind of like they were tag teaming, like acting like me for like about 5 seconds here. One of them would be me and then the other one would be me. And it was just this beautiful, thing that a teacher doesn't always get the appreciation, like you said earlier, is teachers don't always get the appreciation. I felt the love of, even though they were kind of like, a little bit making fun at the same time, it was really just great to see, that I was making a difference on one level or another.
Yeah, exactly. They remembered all of it too, right? So clearly it sunk into their head to the point where they had it ingrained in there in some way, shape, or form, and maybe they don't use it until a couple years down the road after they stop laughing at you a bit. But of course, as you said, it seems like it was, it's fun poking. We're all having a good time. Everyone's having fun.
No doubt about it.
One the one topic, obviously, last topic essentially I want to cover is, what you're currently doing at Virginia Episcopal School. And one thing that I think is very important, and this kind of just not sums up, but really connects to the entire conversation we've been having is, what you're doing there and the reasons behind it. Obviously you were up here in New Jersey, 100 Central, Belvedere, you moved down to Virginia. You said you really like the school because it's a boarding school, if I'm not mistaken, and it looks at the student as a person, not really as a student. And again, kind of connecting the points of you've always liked to look at soccer as an analogy for life, and you can help these people through soccer, their lives through soccer. And now you're at a school that does it. It's the overarching idea of the school is to help people in their entire lives, not just academics, not just sports. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing at Virginia Episcopal and how, this whole connection between soccer and life has really kind of, again, brought you back to this school.
I taught here. It's almost 12 years ago now. Both of my kids were born while I was teaching here. And always, when I was here before, I had this affinity for the place. I really love this school. Exactly for that reason, our moniker is toward the upward stature or toward full stature. And so the idea of becoming your best self is the underlying principle behind the school. And it just so happens that in addition to that being, the focus of the school, they also focus on, the academics, athletics, and also the dorm life is part of things because it is a boarding school, that who you are as a person, and it becomes almost as important as your academic success and everything. So that whole entire concept is 100% in line with who I am as a person. And it just so happened that I was on a recruiting trip for the college that I was working for at the time, and I was going down to Raleigh, North Carolina, and I decided I'm going to stop off and see a couple of my old friends from VES. And I stopped off, and they're like, "Oh yeah, our soccer coach is leaving. Oh yeah, we might have a Spanish position open." So it just seemed like the universe was trying to tell me something, and I'm excited to be back here because of that work that I get to do. I got I got an Instagram direct message about 7 or 8 months ago from one of my former players from here, and it was, just all of this stuff about the influence that I was able to have on him. And now he's almost 30 years old, but the idea of all those little things that I did at that time, little conversations, trusting in him to, become a better person and do things that he didn't think he could. And now he's, an older, almost 30
Mhm.
and looking back, and he's like, thank you so much. And that's the thing that teachers don't get very often. I know this past week was Teacher Appreciation Week, and, send your teacher cupcakes or something along those lines, get them a Starbucks card, go right ahead. But ultimately, as I often say, I won't know whether I'm a success or a failure as a coach or a teacher until about 5 to 10 years later.
Mhm.
That's when I really get to see the work that I've done. And, our common friend, Mike Matullo, is one of those people that, you know, if you would have asked me, when he was a senior in high school, hey, were you successful with Mike? I would have said that exact thing. I'm not going to know for 5 to 10 years, and now I get to see, the person that he's become, and it's not all me. It's his parents. It's his, other coaches and things like that. But I know I have a little bit of a stake to claim in there, and I really appreciate the fact that a lot of my former players and people that I've had influence on come back and say, yeah, I didn't understand what you were saying right then, but I now get it.
Mhm.
And that's those are the types of moments that teachers, coaches, and that we really live for. And so
Mhm.
uh, you always hope that those things are going to happen, that those changes are going to happen, and those kids that see struggling are going to have a positive outcome eventually. But it's always a bit of a roll of the dice. You've got to do the best that you possibly can, and hope that it all works out.
Yeah, and no, Mike he's becoming more and more successful every day. I respect the hell out of what he's doing, especially in the financial field, and he's a good dude. And so clearly, as you said, you don't really get to see all that. It's not an immediate effect. It's something you spend time with someone. I don't know if this is the best way to put it, but you have to drill something into someone's head, especially a 16, 17, 18-year-old, for them to kind of carry that a little bit with them. And as you said, now being able to get those messages, and it's not that you needed the validation, but how nice is it to know that maybe not everybody took everything you said to heart, but some people are saying like, you actually had an impact on me moving forward. That has to just be like one of the greatest feelings in the world as a teacher and as a coach.
Oh yeah, it's spectacular. And the analogy that a lot of people use is the idea of bamboo. It's bamboo. You have to water it for 5 years before you see anything. You're sitting there watering, a brown spot on the ground that there's roots taking hold, but
Hmm.
once it starts to peek through, that's it. It rockets off. And for me, I absolutely love that capability to every
Hmm.
once in a while have a kid come back. I call them kids. These kids,
Yeah.
they're in their late 20s and early 30s and stuff. So I call them kids, but
Mhm.
they're a little bit older now.
Don't worry, Mike's still a kid in my eyes too. I think he's only like half a year younger than me, but he's a good dude. We love him a lot. Jeremy as well. So they're good friends of mine. And so we spoke about quickly. We spoke about one of your books. So you have one other that is out and another that is being written. So first off, what are the names to all your books? Let's get those out there.
Okay, so the first book, the one that I wrote for that summer team, is called Fill Your Boots. And basically the concept was, to look at the shoe that you wear when you're playing.
Hmm.
And at the beginning of the book, I kind of like talk about how, let's just say that you're a 5-year-old kid, your shoes are very small. And if you were to be able to see all of the shoes that you're going to fill throughout your life, it would be real easy to, at the beginning, look at where you're going to be up, being a size like, whatever it is, 2, and eventually see that you're going to be a size 11, it would be tough to see that progress as a little kid. But eventually you're going to get to that spot, and it's just how well you fill out your shoes. Can you reach your actual limits as opposed to just accepting who you are right now, pushing that envelope. So that was the first book. The second book is Soccer Life Balance. And basically that's the kind of moniker that I've taken over for a lot of different things. And the concept there was taking soccer concepts and relating them to life. So for example, one of the first few chapters is Inflate the Ball. Well, you know that if you're playing with a flat ball, you're not going to get very far. But, how does that relate to life? Well, breathing practice. Now, most people are like, well, I'm really good at practicing breathing. I don't need any extra practice. But the whole entire thing is it's one of those things that we overlook. If you ask somebody, and I do this from time to time, I'll do it with classes, is, what's the most important thing you're going to do today? And most people say, I got to do my homework. I got to do this. I got to do that. Very few are going to say breathe. But it's the one thing that if you stop doing it for 10 minutes, you're dead. So recognizing the fact that that is an important thing. And not only is it an important thing, it's also a link to your subconscious and your nervous system. So, you've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So the overlap of those two things, the fight or flight response and also the rest and digest. And it's all linked to breathing that you can get from one to the other. So, we were talking earlier about, being able to go from that 100-mile-per-hour to I need to stop myself because I'm about to do something that's not in my best interest. How do you do that? Well, you've got this adrenaline going. You need to be able to let that go. How do you do that? Through breathing exercises, enabling you to let go of that fight or flight response and go to a more calm and centered state and do it at will rather than being at the effect of what's happening. Most of our world, unfortunately, at this moment is people reacting to what's happening outside of themselves rather than reacting the way that they want. I suggest a lot of things in the book, breathing practice being one of them, hydration being another. There's all kinds of things. But, one of the big things that I talk about is the idea of don't use your technology for the first half hour of the day. Why? Well, because of the fact that you're always going to be in reaction then. If you can spend the first half hour of your day figuring out what it is that you want to get out of the day, not what your friends want for you, not what your teachers want, not what your parents want, not what anybody else wants for you, but what do you want for that day, you're going to have a much clearer vision for what is important to you. So therefore you can act with that in mind, as opposed to first thing you do, pick up your phone. Hey, what does Instagram want to show me as important? Because we're the customer, and we're also the product. Instagram is only a thing because of the fact that you keep on posting on it and you keep on looking at it. Why don't you just stop for a second and figure out who it is that you want to be today? And then can you use that as a resource possibly? So Soccer Life Balance is the second book. And, it's exactly that. It goes through a whole bunch of different concepts. And then the newest book is the one that it actually is the first one, but it's the third one. But
little Quentin Tarantino, maybe some Star Wars going on here.
Exactly. So the whole entire thing is I've had this book in mind for well over 10 years. The title of it and everything. So my last name, as you ran into at the beginning of the interview, is a little tough to say if you look at it. It's spelled Huryk, but it's said Huryk. Well, my uncle, when he was in the military, because of the fact that our last name is difficult to say, they would refer to him as Urok. Okay, you are okay. Now, I just did it for you, and I also said it. Now, the book is going to eventually, and I got to find the right publisher that'll do it this way, hopefully. the idea is the first half of the book is exactly that, spelled out. You are okay. It's a guide, hopefully, for teenagers to get that message across. You are okay. And unfortunately, that's a message that we need to send all too often to our teenagers right now is you're okay. Who you are is okay. It doesn't matter what, Instagram, Snapchat, your friends, all of these people are trying to tell you you are not okay. You are okay. So developing some of those skills that you need in order to feel all right about who you are at the beginning. The second half of the book, and my plan is to, have it be front cover, you are okay, and then flip the book over and it'll be upside down to read in the opposite direction. But that one is you rock. And the idea is that second half of the book is, well, now that you feel comfortable with who you are, how can you take that to the next level? How can you bring yourself to the umpteenth degree and get the absolute most out of yourself that you possibly can? Just finished reading an absolutely awesome book by David Goggins, Can't Hurt Me.
Yep.
If you have not read it, it's life altering if you are willing to allow it to be. I listened to the audiobook, which I feel like is probably even better than the printed version because there's like commentary in there with him. And it's just amazing to hear that guy's story and not, I don't know how anybody, unless, I just have a weird sense of what's important in this world. But listening to that guy's story and being like, yes, I need to get more out of myself. Even, I'm doing all right for myself, but even I could push the limits a little bit farther.
But I love the concept of the third one. I think that's important. And the second one, of course, too, I think, it's a great, just life lessons are always important and they're going to get to people in different ways. And if you can get to soccer fans in that way and you can help, again, even just help one of them some way, shape or form, I think that's great. But again, the concept of the third one I think is pretty cool, and obviously it comes close from the heart. You have been a high school teacher for a long time, a leader of young men and women in the school and in sports, and I think it's a really great way to, again, connect with family lineage. It doesn't hurt as well to really just help people. And I think that's, again, what your life's mission, it seems like it is, and a lot of people along the way.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is difficult for me because of the fact that in the past, I'm going to ballpark it, probably about 7 or 8 years, I've lost at least 8 students or players through non-necessary death, whether it be alcohol and drug related, suicide, accidents that could have been avoided and everything. And it's so difficult for me to see young people pass away before their time, usually through avoidable situations. And a lot of it comes down to this is, they did not feel worthy of love and care and everything like that. So either A, they took their own life because, a girlfriend broke up with them or something like that, or B, they felt like they were worthless. And so therefore they run into problems with alcohol, drugs, or a combination of the two, or it's, I need to get more excitement out of life because of the fact that, my life doesn't seem like it's as exciting as the person who I see on Instagram and YouTube and everything. So I need to push the limits with my motorcycle or this or that. And it's, that I just don't want to lose any more kids. And it has nothing to do with me. It's not the fact that they have a relationship to me that makes it important. It could be anywhere. That's why I put things out into the internet and in the books and everything like that. I tend to, that's probably my weakest point on this whole entire thing is I'm not good at self-promotion. Like, I fly under the radar, not because of the fact that I don't think my message is important. I think that my messages are extremely important. I want to have an impact, but I have this real problem with putting myself out there because I feel salesy, and I don't want to feel salesy. I care about kids. I care about where people are going and whether or not they're going to be able to live their lives to the fullest. And that's my mission. I do, the selling of books is a nice thing. Hey, it makes you feel a little bit good, but that's one part that I've always had a lot of trouble with, is that idea of selling myself to people. Because that's why I like the blog as much as I do, because of the fact that it's free, to anybody. Anybody can pick it up and get something out of it. You know,
Well, let me just say, do it more often, because you were awesome today. We've been doing this for an hour. You've been on, we're on LinkedIn, we're on YouTube right now. That's going to live there forever. The podcast is going to come out in a couple weeks, so people can enjoy the audio version of this as well. So if there's one thing I can leave you with, get on more of this stuff, because you weren't salesy. You were fantastic. You share an incredible message. As you said, it's unfortunate, as you said, with young kids and kind of how the internet works and how their brain works and how all of these things have to happen. But again, you're doing a great thing, and we appreciate you for that. Again, all the books will be in the show notes, so I can promise you got at least one sale right here. Hopefully a couple other people check them out. We'll get the blog in there as well, any of your social medias. I think just keep doing what you're doing, man, because as you've already found out, with people like Mike, with some of your other students, you are making an impact. And the more you can do that, the more people you can touch, the better all of our lives will end up being. So sincerely appreciate what you do, Pete. So I have Peter Huryk, author, speaker, coach, all around great guy. Sincerely appreciate your time today, man.
Yep. No, thank you for having me, Mike.